Welcome to Wellness with Purpose.
My first book is called Me Too, A Therapist's Journey to Heal, Find Liberation, and Joy. Oftentimes, the very people that enter into these healing and liberation spaces, we're doing it because of the past, and yet we haven't faced the past because we believe that we don't need to, that our life is far removed from this, versus an understanding of what trauma is. And trauma is, the reality of trauma is that in some shape or form, we're always going to be working through certain things because of how trauma rests in the body, right? To this day, even though I'm a therapist, even though I'm trained in all these holistic modalities, even though I've written 2 books about all kinds of things related to trauma and non-secure attachment, and I still have triggers because I'm still human.
There are 10 ways a childhood can go wrong. Today's guest survived 8 of them and became a therapist anyway. Demarra West is the founder of Be Well Beautiful People, a Detroit nonprofit bringing healing and liberations to the people most wellness space has forgotten. Demarra, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm really delighted to be here, to have a platform to talk with you about all things healing and liberation.
Wonderful. So, Demarra, I just wanted to talk to you, when did you first realize that your story was actually your calling?
Yeah, I think about my life in terms of the material world and the spiritual world. And I know that long before I became a therapist, long before I knew that I was a trauma survivor, long before this drive to be a pediatrician at the age of 10, all of these things are connected to who I am. And so when I think about trauma and the aftermath of trauma, which can be so devastating, there's a quieting of self, a muting of self that happens in the midst of trauma. But also as we heal, it becomes our driver, right? If indeed we need to heal and if we're given that opportunity to be able to do that. And so although when I became a therapist, it was really driven by this fascination in people's behavior, right? I really wanted to know, why do people do what they do? And although I knew that I had a painful childhood, at that time, we weren't talking about trauma the way that we talk about trauma right now, right? We weren't talking about survivorship. We weren't, there wasn't trauma responsiveness. And even though this is a body of research that has been around for a long time, in terms of mainstream, it didn't come into our realm of consciousness, I would say, until about 20 years ago. And, I've been a therapist now for 16 years, and I went through my first trauma-informed training and recognized that I had 8 out of 10 ACEs at that time. This had to be maybe 14 years ago. Wow. But when you think about that, 14 years ago isn't really that long of a time, considering that trauma has been around forever, right? So what I know now is that my fascination with people's behaviors was very much rooted in my trauma indicator, if you will. People's drive was rooted in who I was as a young person, the experiences that I had, but I didn't know that at the time, right? It was joy. And in fact, when I left undergrad, I said, I never want to be in a formal education setting again. I'm a learner for life, and I will always be reading something, learning something, but I felt that formal education was not something that I needed to be able to build the life that I wanted. But then within a couple years later, I was really driven by this fascination, and then decided to enter grad school and apply for a Thurgood Marshall Fellowship. And then years later, here I am.
So yeah, right. Because there is a difference between picking a career and being called to one. And hearing your stories, yours sounded like the second kind, you've been called to this path.
Yeah, and I will say that I have always been called to do the work that I do, right? I didn't, for example, I worked for the National Resource Center for Racial Healing for a couple years. All of my professional experience was in the nonprofit sector. Even when I started my consulting practice 18 years ago, I'm a social entrepreneur. I did so underneath this belief, or based on the belief, that I wanted to make sure that those who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford capacity building services, things like strategic planning and executive coaching and, evaluation and all of these things to help ensure the health of an organization and the health of the individuals working within the organization. I wanted to make sure that I could fill a gap. And so for 18 years, I've done market rate on down to fully financially accessible. Why? Because my heart bleeds for the people. Well, I know that one of the reasons why my heart bleeds for the people is because I'm a person who's had my heart cut wide open multiple times as a childhood pain. And many experiences that I've had post that, as I have realized how important it is for me to do my own work, which is why my first book is called Me Too, A Therapist's Journey to Heal, Find Liberation, and Joy. Oftentimes, the very people that enter into these healing and liberation spaces, we're doing it because of the past, and yet we haven't faced the past because we believe that we don't need to, that our life is far removed from this, versus an understanding of what trauma is. And trauma is that the reality of trauma is that in some shape or form, we're always going to be working through certain things because of how trauma rests in the body, right? And to this day, even though I'm a therapist, even though I'm trained in all these holistic modalities, even though I've written 2 books about all kinds of things related to trauma and non-secure attachment, and I still have triggers because I'm still fully human. And I don't think that I'll ever not have triggers. I just think that they're just going to look different in terms of how they play out in my life.
I hear you, because it's very important to, people can address the elephant in the room, but they don't address the elephant in their own life.
Come on now. That's such wisdom. And many times it's not because we don't want to touch the elephant in our, we don't know many times. Right. And so this is why a lot of my work with professionals, particularly with the helping profession, is to help them to understand how important it is for them to look at their own pain, for them to get the support that they need so that they can be as whole as possible, for them to be aware of the ways in which that trauma is in the driver's seat of their own lives, preventing them from having joy and peace and maybe financial prosperity, whatever it might be that is blocking them, right, from the life that they want. Many times the life that we want is really connected to the bridge is the extent to which we heal, right? And we can get all of the external support that's there. We can get the right education. We can marry the right person. We can live in the right neighborhood. We can build the right business. We can work in service of community. And all of those things can be true while also like this understanding that there are ways in which that if we haven't healed, that we're actually living an imbalanced life less than, if you will.
So can you break down it, since you're talking about ACE, what ACE actually are for people who don't know, and what it feels like to carry that world the whole time?
Yeah, absolutely. So ACEs are adverse childhood experiences that are based on a body of research that came out in the early 90s by a group called Kaiser Permanente. And what they wanted to understand was, what are the indicators of trauma that exist in young people, and what might that mean for their evolution into adulthood, right? How are these, what are the trauma markers, and how do these markers show up in one's life, affecting every single major organ system in the body, the heart, the mind, the stomach, right? Where we have all this research that shows that, for example, digestive issues is oftentimes connected to our emotions, right? Like, we don't just operate in isolation. We are one full being. And so anytime that we experience pain, even if it's just heartbreak, right? The same neural pathway that communicates physical pain in the brain is the same one that creates emotional pain. It's the same neural pathway. And yet we deal with emotional pain as if it's not as important as physical pain, right? We have physical pain, we normally go and we address it, right? In a number of ways. And so back ACEs is based on 10 markers that are things like a young person witnessing their parent being abused, right? That would be a marker. A young person experiencing abuse, right? Physical abuse or neglect. So let's say a child routinely was hungry. That would be a indicator of trauma. So there are 10 categories. As you named, I have 8 out of 10 of what we call the baseline ACEs. And that there's an expanded version of ACEs that has a total of 15. So this includes things like witnessing community violence, right? So communities that are highly steeped in violence, a young person that gets bullied, right? So these would be additional markers that help us to understand where a young person may have been coming from and to contextualize their behavior. The question that we ask in the trauma community is not what's wrong with someone, but what happened to them.
है.
Because behaviors are indicative of suffer, and all we see are the behaviors, which is like an iceberg. So we get to behaviors are the tip of the iceberg. All of the things that happen to that young person, all the pain that they endured, that's what we don't see unless we are the people that have witnessed it too, or we've invoked the pain on someone, right? And unless we talk about these things and we normalize these things, then we carry shame, right? Carry shame, well, we're saying we're ashamed of who we are. We're ashamed of these experiences that we've had versus this neutralization. Like, I had these experiences, I survived these experiences. And this is why, even as a therapist, I oftentimes will say I'm a survivor, even though I don't like how we become hyper focused on the survivor part. Oh, I could say all of these things in my bio. And if I say survivor, people want to know, like, what is this about survivorship? But the reason why I do this is to model something that is abnormal within the professional therapeutic community. Even though on average 70% of therapists have experienced at least one traumatic episode in their life, and I would argue that there are more people like me that have actually endured complex childhood trauma that have, on average 4 ACEs, which is about 25% of the population, have 4 racism or more. So I say I'm a survivor because it's so out of the norm for us to do this. And it's to humanize me and to humanize all of us that have had these experiences. And to also name that, because resiliency and trauma is also a thing. Talk about trauma as a thing that is just bad. And it is, and it's painful. But we don't talk about the resiliency that can come as a result, right? We talk about intergenerational trauma. We don't oftentimes talk about intergenerational resilience. Right? And yes, as much pain as I had in my childhood, I also had joy. I also had many moments of joy, right? And so I think we got to talk about this in a way that just is matter of fact about our experiences when we're ready to, right? Because I'm on the side of the thing of these experiences that allow me to talk about this in a more matter of fact way because of where I'm on my own healing and liberation journey.
And you said very rightly that that's the invisible part, because as we are seeing it from outside, the life is very normal. But there is a whole war which is happening inside. And I feel that piece, the most people never say out loud. So yes, you are rightly said that we have to address that too. So yeah. And I also want to talk about you said in first hand that you feel like the system which is designed for healing fails you. So what did that failure actually look like?
So I talk about this in my first book, Me Too, A Therapist's Journey to Heal, Find Liberation and Joy. All the major systems that I was connected to failed me because these systems that are set up to observe us, let's talk about the education system, for example, right? One person spends a lot of time with their educators, right, within this institution. And although educators are not responsible solely for the care of young people, they are partially responsible for the care and the education of young people. Because in these environments, educators really have an opportunity to witness young people and what's happening with them. They have the opportunity to interrupt bullying. They have an opportunity to educate on the values that are really important. Have an opportunity to witness how patterns are changing in a young person's life. They have an opportunity to be a safe haven for young people to talk about these things. And I did have a school counselor in middle school. Her name is Thelma Bynum. And I'm in touch with Mrs. Bynum to this day because she was one of the few educators who really saw me. And she was the person that I know in part was my saving grace. And I also had other amazing educators. I want to be really clear about this. Like, I would never throw education or any system under the bus in its totality. All I'm arguing is that within the system of education, within the system of mental health, within the system of law enforcement, how can we ensure that these spaces are rooted in survivorship principles? How do we ensure that these spaces are as trauma responsive as possible? How do we ensure that survivors are believed, they're listened to, they're advocated for, right? Because what I talk often about is that it's not just trauma itself that's problematic, it's the aftermath. What happens for a person? Where do they go once this devastating thing has happened to them? Where do they go? And so I talk about how my therapist labeled me and the ways in which she encouraged my mother to do things in the opposite of what would have helped me to find liberation, right? Law enforcement, they made so many harmful mistakes within my case when I sought to get justice, right? And even though we're talking about, I'm 45 years old, I talk about this thing that happened to me at the age of 13 that, nearly took me out. And as I sought justice and the way that I was treated, we could say now, right, this was 30 plus years ago, but the reality is that these same things still play out today.
It's still happening. Yeah.
There is so much work that can be done, create a of support for healing and liberation for people from all walks of life, so that as people choose to seek the support to heal from trauma and to get other kinds of basic needs met, we're doing it in the most human-centric way possible. Because that's the thing that helps people to feel the psychological safety necessary to be able to go on a journey that cracks them open again. The trauma has cracked someone open, and as a person goes through the healing process, it cracks them open again and again as they are finding their way back into this new integrated self. Because we're never the person we were before a traumatic incident happens. We become things authentic, right? And it's about connecting now who we are to the person that we want to become, right? And embracing all of it, right? Embracing the fullness of that.
So now that we are talking about the Be Well Beautiful people. So when someone walks in and a person is saying, I want to be well, but I don't know where to start. So what does the first real conversations look like?
Yeah, I love this question because there's a nebulous part healing and well-being, right? And there's a lot of things that we get wrong about what does it actually mean to be well. And so where I begin with people is why is this essentially important for them, right? Why now? Why now? And what is the vision essentially that they have for their lives? If indeed they were well, what would be different? What would feel different for them? How would they move through the world differently? What would they say yes to and no to? What boundaries would they have in place? What ways would they want to make money, right? So, and I do this because what I want people to be able to lean into is a vision for their lives that is possible for us to co-curate together. And so I use this mantra a lot in my work, and I say that, it works if you work it. So I learned years ago when I became a therapist that just because talked about wanting healing and liberation, it didn't mean that they were ready for it. People could talk about getting, the same thing for 20, 30, 40 years. Now, what I want to say is that there's no judgment. Like, people are where they are. I'm naming how stuck we can get in our pain. So the reason why I take people through this visioning, I'm trying to assess, are you actually ready to do the work? Because if you're ready to do the work and roll up your sleeves and do it, then we can do it. And what I want to name really quickly is that a focal point of my work that I feel deeply about is people's self-efficacy to heal themselves. The body has amazing ability to heal itself when the nervous system settles. And so this is why it's so important to meditate, to journal, to be in nature, to take in fresh air, to sit in the sun, to be engaged in our purposes, what we've been put on this planet to do. All of these things help us to be one with self, help us to create more joy, to create more impact in the world. So the reason why I focus on this is because it doesn't really take all of the things that we think it takes for us to be well. This thing is actually a lot more simpler than what people realize it is. It is complex and also simple all at the same time, right? Even 3 deep breaths, if you and I were to do 3 deep breaths together, something's going to shift in us just from 3 deep breaths that might take us 20 seconds to do, 30 seconds to do. Time is meaningful based on the practices that we choose to engage with. And even if I get on my yoga mat and I sit on my yoga mat for 60 minutes, if I'm not focused on my breath as I engage in this practice, yes, I'm going to get benefits from doing yoga, but I'm not going to get the same number of benefits as when I integrate my breath and the movement together, because this is what connects us to self. This is what connects us to self and what connects us to a higher self. And no matter what we believe from a spiritual standpoint, and I use God, universe, source, creator interchangeably, we are like spiritual beings having a human experience, no matter what it is that we believe, right? And this is important because our healing is in part connected to our inner world.
So true. Yeah.
And all the research supports this, on top, of course, having healthy connections, because when we're surrounded by love, it ignites love within, right? It ignites the energy. So I know that we're talking about, things that are a little, out of sorts for many people in the business world. And yet it's very much connected to my work. And even from an entrepreneurial landscape, this is a lot of the training that I do around on this mindset. Like, I can teach you the mechanics of starting and scaling a business. And let's talk about what are the values, the internal values that helped us to easily curate in the world, to attract what it is that we're looking to draw into our lives.
Beautiful. Of course, as you said, that breathing is the simplest thing that we have been born with. And this is the thing we completely forgot. That focus on your life pulse, that is breathe.
Yes. And life force energy, it is the only automatic system that all living beings have.
Yeah.
Right. And that as we connect to it, it can calm, it can center us, it can make us be more present, it can create clearing for us, right? So that we can find a solution to a problem we've been sitting with. It's amazing what our breath can do when we are intentional in the maneuvering of, when we manipulate it to work for our good.
So you all was talking about the nature. So let's talk about that. You are certified in forest bathing. And I have to ask, because most people have no idea with what that is. So what is it and what it takes and why does it work when talking doesn't work?
Absolutely. So I forest bathing is one of the main things people ask me about, on top of Reiki, right? And more people are learning about Reiki, but I find that forest bathing, and in fact, many people think it's like being out in the forest and like, are we taking a bath in the forest? Like, what are we?
It says
Bathing is a practice that that was named in Japan in the 40s, I believe. And even though it's an indigenous practice, I believe it's been around longer than that. It wasn't called forest bathing, but the name forest bathing comes from Japan. And all it means is that you are literally immersing yourself in a natural environment with the only intention of disconnecting and slowing down and allowing nature to essentially be your guide. So the way that you would do a forest bathing experience is that you're independent. You could be with a group, right? But you are independent on this journey. You're completely unplugged. You're not moving with the sake of movement in mind. You're moving with the sake of flow in mind. What calls your attention? Is it the bird chirping? Is it the ruffling of the leaves? Is it the way that the sun comes through that branch and as it hits the ground? Is it the way that you see birds behavior taking place? Is it this body of water, the brook? What essentially calls you? And so you may go on an experience. You could go on a 5-minute experience. You could go on an hour-long experience, or hours for that matter. And the natural area could be any area, right? You could even do forest bathing just looking at your plants and as you connect to them. Putting your in the grass could be a form
of walking barefoot.
Precisely, right? As you are mindfully walking, if indeed you're doing it in a way to call nature in, pay attention, because a lot of times when people are outside, and I'm sure you've noticed this, people are looking down. Even when I'm outside and like I go to a lot of preserves and, I'm outside walking on, where I live in Detroit, I live really close to the DeQuinder Cut and the Riverwalk. So I'm constantly walking there. And then I just went to the Southwest Greenway, which is so beautiful. And I'm like trying to conjure up my friends to come out there with me for walks, but I also love to walk alone, and I walk alone more often than not. No matter where we are, whether there's, murals in the areas, buildings, hills, flowers, it doesn't matter what the area entails. All that matters is that we are intentionally connecting to it. And then also artificial plants can serve as a very similar impact, right? But just with artificial plants, we don't get the phytochemical, right, part to it. But the brain actually doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's fake. And I want to name that, right? So even if I open my window, and this is why also letting natural light into our spaces, when we can see the great outdoors, even that is a form of connectivity to nature, right? There's all these ways that we can bring nature into our space and all these ways that we can connect to nature in the great outdoors, right? And so then if you were to go on a formal forest bathing experience and even by yourself, what you want to do is invite in reflection, right? So as you're noticing all of these connectivities, and it's really beautiful to see this because people who are novice to the great outdoors, of course, there's all this wondrous things that happens for people. But what's really cool also is that people who are like outdoors a lot will have the same kinds of experiences because there's something about the intention that you set and what shows up for you into your world, and which is very unique, people's perspectives, what people see and pay attention to. It's fascinating to me, but it works every single time I facilitate an experience like that.
So beautiful people just turned 2. So what has been the hardest part? Not the PR version, the real version.
Yeah. So I have founded several social entrepreneurs. I've been a social entrepreneur for a long time. So I have founded several social enterprises over the years. And this is my second nonprofit. In my first nonprofit, I said, I will never start a nonprofit again. So that just gives you a snapshot, okay?
Yeah.
I started off with this body of work called Be Well Beautiful Woman and led that for 3 years as a social enterprise and really amazing work in partnership with a local funder, from my hometown of Kalamazoo. I've been in Detroit. It was 2 years yesterday, actually. I celebrated my anniversary here.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you so much. So as that work evolved, I realized that many things. I didn't just want to serve women. I wanted to open up this retreat center that was market rate on down to fully financially accessible. And that I was really ready to live in more of a healing and liberation space collectively. And so as I thought about that and all the things that I could do, the things that I had done over the years, that's how Be Well Beautiful People was birthed. I didn't set out to start another nonprofit, and yet I started this nonprofit. And I will say one of the biggest challenges, and this is the challenge of many nonprofits, particularly as you're starting out and you're starting out in a new market, funding is a big thing. And like Detroit, that's very relational, and funding in general is relational. That makes it that much more complicated. So a lot of the time that I've spent doing work over the last 2 years has been outreach, like just getting myself out there in community, meeting with people, attending community events. And so the rigor involved in like showing up in all these spaces, in rolling up my sleeves to do what's necessary as I wipe my brow, right? Like it is intense work. And yet I know this is the work that I was called to do. And I know that I was called to do it in this way. And I know that I was called to do it in Detroit, right? So of course my work is not only in Detroit, and Be Well Beautiful People is my nonprofit. I also have, my other social enterprise, People First Executive, which is a virtual executive assistant placement company, also executive search company. And then there's Demarra West LLC, right? That's the holder of my speaking, my training, my books. So I have all of these things happening at the same time. And People First actually launched at the same time as when my book came out. And that was at the January of this year. So launching a company at the same time that a book is coming out, I would not recommend that. Listen, while also laying the groundwork for a nonprofit. One of the things that people ask me often is, do you ever sleep? And I'm like, yes, I sleep. I have a great time. My life is full. And I can understand why people would think that because I'm like building really massive things right now, right? And, it's like, you don't want to just do it easy. I don't know what easy is, actually. I don't even and not saying, let me say this, everybody deserves the easy life. And my practices help me to have an easy life. When I went to an outside house music dance party yesterday, right? Like I know how to, I live life fully. So by virtue of me living life fully, having great relationships, moving my body, engaging in mindful practice, all of these things help buffer the rigor of my life, right? And in my building. And I always talk about like when we're in a harvest season, how important it is to plant more into ourselves to help sustain and to create resiliency as we're building, right? Because because this work, as we both know, is not for the faint at heart. It is not and it's worthwhile because whatever we're aligned with our purpose, our passion, then it's worthwhile to invest in, to build, right? And, the law of labor says that as we build, as we labor, eventually there's going to be a payoff, right, for the labor. So those are the big things I would say, right, that have been my most significant challenges as I have built this thing out.
Really very thoughtful and wonderful that you said. So I think we are on time. So I know, Demarra, that this is coming. So where are you exactly with the AI right now in your organization?
With my EA?
With AI right now in the running the organization?
That's such an important question, right? AI is a beautiful hot topic, and it serves as a lot of support for us in our work, right? So, for example, my EA uses AI often when she's curating content. We use AI when we're developing a proposal. We use it when it comes to doing research, right? And so we of course, check our resources and all of that good stuff because AI does make mistakes, as we both know. But I feel like AI, we use it in the ways that are helping to create more productivity within the company, for sure. And I also want to name that there are things that are glaring about AI right now that I'm pondering, right? So I heard someone speak recently about how people are using AI for well-being reasons, right? And using it to diagnose, and all of these, some of which are horrific things that are happening as a result, right? And then who's responsible? How do we filter through this? Can we really put safeguards in necessary? Can AI ever really have a human touch? Can it actually ever do that, right? So I will say that I'm grateful for the ways in which I've been able to use it to support my work. And I also am a little leery by some of the ways that we're using AI today that are blocking our ability to be as well as we need to, right? And so that might be another conversation.
Yeah, of course. And that answers always says everything about what actually matters to you. Because if you're offloading your admin tasks, it's good, but it costs the human connection which you never want to lose. So of course you are going to handle it yourself. So absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are right on the verge. So what is next for you and Be Well Beautiful People? And how can people actually support you?
Yeah. So a big thing that's next for us is we are hosting Heart Summit, which is this global well-being summit that is going to be hosted in Detroit, October 8th through the 10th. And so this will be an opportunity to highlight the ways that Detroit is practicing well-being from an individual, communal, and ecological standpoint, exploring to new ways of well-being across several tenets like food and neuroscience and individual and organizational well-being, intergenerational trauma and resiliency, all of these things, and then art as a universal language of well-being. And so that's a big thing that we're doing, that very localized, but people from all over will be coming in to be a part of this 2.5-day immerse experience, which is a big undertaking. It's going to be so beautiful to carry this out. Post that, we are going to be laying the groundwork to open up a retreat center that is in part designed and curated for Detroiters and beyond, and rolling out trauma responsive training and a mental health arm to our work. So we've got a lot of big things coming down the pipeline. On top of course, Love Will Liberate. I'm on a national book tour right now, and 10 total cities, including Detroit. So my hope is that if folks are in one of those cities, including Boston, so my hope is that I will get to see you in person when I say.
Yeah, good luck with all the things that are moving in your life. And okay, Demarra, thank you again. And
Thank you.
the line that stays with me is very simple. What I read about you is healing and revelations are a birthright, not the luxury, the birthright. And what I feel is this is a whole mission in just 4 words. If this conversation moved you, send it to the person who needs it, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you so much.